This is In the Loop. I'm Christian Bryant. Let's just dive right in, shall we? In tonight's show, we'll take a second to acknowledge baseball's opening day and the role America's pastime has played during national crises. Plus, we'll take a closer look at Portland protests and the use of tear gas. But first, here's what you need to know right now. Today, we found out what's included in the nearly $1 trillion coronavirus relief package being put together by the Senate and White House, aka the parts of the government controlled by the majority party with the power to get bills passed. More than $100 billion will go to schools and universities, with a big chunk of that money aimed at encouraging schools to reopen. The White House says it also wants this bill to include another round of direct payments via stimulus checks, though details on that are still scarce. And the Senate plans to extend unemployment insurance, which is set to run out at the end of the month. But Republicans are looking to cut down those payments to match 70% of a worker's lost income. More than 25 million workers are currently signed up to receive those checks. Several cities will see an increased presence of federal law enforcement. It's a part of something called Operation Legend, which will deploy federal agents to Chicago, Baltimore, Philadelphia, and Albuquerque. President Trump says the move is meant to help local law enforcement counter violent crime, but many local leaders say the federal presence will only lead to more violence in the communities.
When we ask for federal help, that's one thing. But when the President of the United States starts to use federal officers like his own personal police force, that's very dangerous for our democracy.
Baseball is back, and it looks a little different. Today's long-delayed opening day marks the first opening for any of the 4 major U.S. sports leagues, and it's fitting that it's our national pastime that's the first one back out on the field. After all, this is a sport that's been around long enough to lead to this side-by-side from 2 different pandemics separated by more than a century. And looking back at baseball during the 1918 pandemic, you can learn a little something, both about sports during the pandemic and about baseball's cultural impact for a nation in crisis.
Baseball kind of is a barometer. It takes America's temperature.
That's Randy Roberts, a real-life baseball historian who wrote a book about baseball in the time of the influenza pandemic, a time when the baseball season was shortened because of an even bigger crisis.
In 1918 series, we didn't know there was a pandemic on the horizon, so nobody knew that. What we knew was that there was a war on the horizon, and Americans were going to have to go to war. Late summer of 1918, the flu's going to come back from Europe to America, and it had mutated, and it comes back right at the end of August. And the World Series that year was played in Boston and Chicago in early September. The last few World Series games that took place in Boston, undoubtedly this flu had already spread to the civilian population, and probably there were people with the flu at the series games that infected other people.
There's little chance of that happening this season, seeing that fans will have to partake in the pastime from outside hallowed stadiums, but the desire for the game to go on, especially in the midst of a crisis and even when there's so much at risk, is as old as baseball itself. And throughout American history, people have recognized how important it is that the game go on.
Abraham Lincoln went to a baseball game during the American Civil War. Woodrow Wilson went to many baseball games during World War I.
And during World War II, FDR told the commissioner of baseball, Kennesaw Mountain Landis, yeah, that's his actual name. FDR told Kennesaw Mountain Landis, "I honestly feel that it would be best for the country to keep baseball going."
But he gives a green light for the game to go on. He says it will provide entertainment for millions of people. It will take Americans' mind off the war for only maybe a couple hours or 3 hours. It shows the continuation of America, that things are going on even during a war.
When you're back, we'll connect with the homies at Bellingcat to take a closer look at the Portland protests and how tear gas has been used by federal agents. So you've gotten tested or treated for COVID-19. Newsy wants to hear from you about how much your treatment cost. Whether your bill was big or small, share your cost of COVID story by going to newsy.com/bills.
I did not think it would be this difficult for me to obtain a medical abortion.
Why can't you pick this pill up in a pharmacy?
It has real risks for the mom.
It's a bureaucracy.
I felt like nobody was gonna be able to help me.
Protests have been non-stop in Portland, Oregon since the death of George Floyd. And in the past week, clashes between the public and law enforcement has ratcheted up as federal agents have rolled into town.
I'm not gonna lie, it stings.
Just last night, the mayor of Portland was tear-gassed while joining demonstrators for a listening session. Our Newsy Bellingcat series pairs our own reporting with our partners at the International Journalism Collective Bellingcat. Together, we looked at federal agents' use of tear gas, a chemical agent banned in war zones but now used frequently in American streets.
These are federal law enforcement agents in Portland. Their stated purpose for being there is to protect federal property from being damaged. To that end, they've tear-gassed, flashbanged, and abducted protesters, putting them in rented vans. These tactics, at least to the degree that the federal agents are using them, are not typically seen on American streets, and as we'll show in this video, they've gone beyond both conventional crowd control and beyond the limits placed on local police.
The entirety of the area by the Justice Center, a cloud too thick to see through.
Protests over police brutality in Portland have taken place daily for more than 50 days. They started after George Floyd's death at the hands of Minneapolis police officers in late May and have mainly taken place here in downtown Portland near a federal U.S. District Courthouse and a county justice center which houses the Portland Police Bureau's chief headquarters. The protests gradually became more tense as police used increasingly aggressive tactics to disperse protesters.
Things being thrown directly at people, shifting traffic, gassing traffic again.
The introduction of federal agents, ostensibly to protect federal property and monuments, created even more tension.
2 days ago, leftist radicals in Portland, Oregon ripped down a statue of George Washington and wrapped it in an American flag and set the American flag on fire.
The federal agents in Portland are a hodgepodge of Department of Homeland Security forces like Immigrations and Customs Enforcement and Customs and Border Protection Services, as well as the U.S. Marshals Service groups. A leaked DHS memo published by the New York Times suggests that many of these teams in Portland aren't properly trained in riot control or mass demonstrations.
The feds come out and just open fire and just shoot as much as they can into the crowd with impact and like munitions. And they're gassing too, but they're just opening fire the same way they would with a rifle because like they're not really trained in using this stuff.
This is Robert Evans, a reporter with our partners at Bellingcat, who's been on the ground in Portland since protests first started and has watched them escalate. Likewise, he's also seen the escalating response from law enforcement.
The night that particularly highlighted it to me was the 4th of July.
Fireworks.
The feds are shooting out grenades and pouring tear gas out into the streets, and it was like the only way this could get more intense is if people were shooting live rounds.
In June, Portland police were ordered to use less tear gas by a judge. That order has since been extended, but it doesn't apply to federal agents who have deployed massive amounts of tear gas during protests.
God, a ladle of tear gas just being kicked in.
We analyzed about 14 hours of Evans footage covering protests in Portland over the last 3 weeks. With that, we were able to identify at least 50 uses of tear gas against demonstrators. All of this in the month following the court order that banned tear gas use by Portland police, except in life-threatening situations. We reached out to Homeland Security to ask about their use of tear gas in Portland, and the department refused to comment. But it's not just about the federal agents' use of tear gas.
God.
They don't use flashbangs the way you're supposed to use flashbangs. They throw them into the middle of groups of people like a normal hand grenade and catch people on fire sometimes as a result. They shoot people directly with grenades like you do with the grenades that are meant to kill people. Like they act as soldiers do.
The flashbangs he's talking about are low-roll distraction devices manufactured by Defense Technology. While not exclusive to federal police, Evans says in Portland they've been used much more liberally and, more worryingly, incorrectly.
Firing Flashbangs, gas into the f***ing crowd. A lot of f***ing flashbangs.
Portland's police has its own documented issues with police brutality, something protesters in Portland have tried to keep in focus. But local leaders claim the expanded federal presence in Portland has made matters worse rather than alleviate the situation. And given the president's claim that Homeland Security is needed to protect federal property across the United States, other cities are facing a new reality of federal agents with a local presence.
Swifties, get ready. We shouting y'all out once these ads are over.
There's 3 American girls competing for the top 2 Olympic spots.
I could go into this and come out with nothing.
Native women have told me that what you do when you raise a daughter is you prepare her for what to do when she's raised, not if, but when.
Why are we different than every other person? Why don't we have the justice everybody else does?
These trending topics probably didn't make it to the front page of your local newspaper, but they've got people talking on Twitter. Here's what's trending. Taylor Swift is trending because at 8:01 a.m. Eastern Time, she kicked us all in the teeth and announced a surprise album. I don't even listen to Taylor Swift, and I caught a jolt. The singer's new album, Folklore, drops tonight, and Swift says she wrote the entire album in isolation. She collaborated with the genre-permeating Bon Iver and The National's Aaron Dessner. If you know a Swiftie, please check on them. Iron Mike announced he's getting back in the ring for his first actual fight in 15 years. But if you've been watching his training videos on IG, you know he's still got hands. Tyson will go up against another boxing legend, Roy Jones Jr. Both men are in their 50s. Here's one way to solve the problem of renaming your team. Just don't. The Washington football team will go by that very name and use these comically blank slate uniforms for the indefinite future while the club consults with players, fans, sponsors, and the community to figure out a new name to replace their old one, which, we're not gonna say here. This pandemic has been ugly, and at times it has brought out the ugliness in some Americans. According to the Asian Pacific Policy and Planning Council, anti-Asian discrimination has been on the rise, in part because of where COVID-19 originated. Newsy's Kat Sandoval takes a look at how Asian Americans are being affected and what actions are being taken to curb discrimination.
In Fairfax, Virginia, this was supposed to be a fun picnic, but instead, Tara Bokum and her friends were harassed.
Bye! Go to your own country. Go to your own country. Go to your own country, dreamer.
The man is 51-year-old James Lilly.
I got a rock for your head.
In the midst of the coronavirus pandemic, thousands of anti-Asian incidents have been reported around the country. The Fairfax Police Department tells Newsy Lilly was arrested for assault and disorderly conduct for another incident that happened a few hours later, and they are currently investigating this specific incident.
The part that was scariest is when he was like, I have a rock for your head.
Elementary school teacher Tara Bokum says she started filming in case the altercation escalated even more.
My friends and I were honestly shocked because this is kind of something you always see on the internet, and none of us have had this first-on experience where someone was attacking us for no reason for our race.
Like Bokum, others have filmed the incidents of hate.
I don't want them under me. Tell them to move.
In New York City, a man sprays a cleaning solution on a passenger. In Santa Fe, New Mexico, White Power and Trump 2020 were scrolled on walls. Owners at the Indian restaurant estimate the vandalism cost $100,000 in damages. In California, this CEO stepped down after his racist rant went viral.
Trump's gonna you. Asian piece of
Also in California,
I hate Asians.
An elderly man collecting cans was attacked. There is no federal data on Asian American hate crimes amid the COVID-19 pandemic. So Stop AAPI Hate started tracking incidents. They've noted over 2,000 nationally. In California, there were more than 850 discriminatory incidents. In New York State, more than 300 self-reported cases. And there's an uptick. Last year, in its first quarter, the NYPD reported 3 anti-Asian hate crimes in New York City. This year, it jumped to 11 cases.
I just think it's so humiliating and debasing.
Russell Jung, who founded Stop AAPI Hate, says based on the data, children, the elderly, and women were attacked more than men.
People are angry, people are fearful, and people want to take out their anger on scapegoats. Because the coronavirus comes from China, we expected more Chinese to be attacked, and 40% of our respondents are Chinese, but 60% are non-Chinese, which shows that this anti-Asian hate is a case of racial profiling. It's anybody who looks Chinese are getting targeted.
Jung teaches Asian American studies, and he says anti-Asian attacks is history repeating itself by racializing the disease.
It happened with smallpox in the 19th century, with bubonic plague in the 20th century, happened with SARS, and sure enough, it happened with the coronavirus.
And that's why the World Health Organization strongly advises against the terms Chinese virus and China virus, because they can lead to racial profiling. Currently, 2 congressional bills have been introduced that propose federal data collection on anti-Asian hate crimes and investigations and prosecutions of perpetrators. Kat Sandoval, Newsy.
A couple months ago, New York City was the COVID-19 hotspot in the U.S. But today, NYC seems to be getting things under control, while a long list of other cities across the country are dealing with their own spikes. Newsy's Caitlin Baldwin has more.
The White House has reportedly told leaders in 11 major cities to take aggressive action against the coronavirus. The Center for Public Integrity says the private conversations were prompted by rising rates of positivity in COVID-19 testing. Dr. Deborah Birx made the calls Wednesday to Baltimore, Cleveland, Columbus, Indianapolis, and Las Vegas. Also on the list were Miami, Minneapolis, Nashville, New Orleans, Pittsburgh, and St. Louis. Birx told those cities their rising positivity rates require them to take serious steps to curb the spread. The White House Coronavirus Task Force coordinator warned leaders that small positivity rate increases can quickly spiral out of control.
When you first see that increased test positivity, that is when to start the mitigation efforts. I know it may look small and you may say, well, that's only went from 5 to 5.5 and we're going to wait and see what happens. If you wait another 3 or 4, even 5 days, you'll start to see a dramatic increase in cases.
The Center for Public Integrity quoted critics criticizing the White House for talking with local officials in private conversations about coronavirus outbreaks and leaving the public out. Last week, the center released a private White House report of states in a red zone for COVID-19 cases. The organization describes itself as a nonprofit newsroom focusing on the influence of money and the impact of inequality on society. For Newsy, I'm Caitlin Baldwin.
If you want to get in touch with us at In The Loop, hit us up on Twitter using the hashtag NewsyInTheLoop. We haven't earned our own email address yet, but soon. Like what you're seeing here on Newsy? Just remember, you can come back every evening for a full update on the day's top stories to get caught up on the news that matters most to you. All facts, no opinion. On your schedule, anytime you need us, every day. We're Newsy. Be informed, not influenced. People who've recovered from COVID-19 aren't just survivors. They're also potential lifesavers for other people infected with the coronavirus because of what's in their blood. Newsy's Virology series has been covering the pandemic since day one. In this installment, Kevin Clancy dives into the world of plasma donations and why where you donate really matters.
Picture this. You contract COVID-19 and are fortunate enough to recover after a few days of symptoms. You've finally kicked the virus. And with your newfound energy, it's only natural you might ask the question, what can I do to help? A quick search pulls up a local food bank, grocery deliveries for the elderly, and plasma donations. Experts believe blood plasma from recovered coronavirus patients could be a game changer in the world's fight against COVID-19. But how this plasma is used and where you donate it makes a big difference. Plasma is a yellow-colored fluid that makes up over 50% of our blood. It contains things like glucose and electrolytes, but most importantly, plasma contains antibodies which help to fight infectious diseases. In theory, if a recovered COVID-19 patient donates their plasma, it could be used to boost a recovering patient's immune system. In a way, taking the active immunity from one patient and giving it to another. This practice has already been proven in a small amount of cases to speed up recovery time in COVID patients. Plasma has been used to treat outbreaks of SARS and MERS, and globally, plasma donations are common. But unlike much of the developed world, the US has both unpaid plasma donations and a for-profit industry for plasma. The Red Cross and many local blood banks rely on volunteer donations and send plasma directly to hospitals to meet short-term transfusion needs. But there's also a for-profit industry for plasma, which pays donors, many of whom rely on that money. However, most of that plasma goes abroad for expensive pharmaceutical therapies. Usually, there's more than enough plasma for both pipelines. But COVID-19 has created a new demand, and some experts are worried that the for-profit industry could divert donors away from where plasma is needed.
If they're giving the impression that it's somehow going to treat, the folks at the outbreak, at the senior home, in your community when they're hospitalized in your community, that is more than likely misleading.
That's Dr. Adam Brzezinski. He and his team at Case Western University study these for-profit plasma donation centers.
It's a far longer supply chain that is, really turning those into a wide variety of plasma-based products. And it's extremely unlikely to be like antibodies that help grandma, probably not.
Across U.S. hospitals, plasma from recovered COVID-19 patients is in high demand and short supply.
Nationally, we currently have about a little over 6,000 people who've registered as potential donors on our website.
Dr. Nigel Paneth of Michigan State University is part of a new national group of experts looking into plasma treatments for COVID-19.
It's not near enough. I mean, look, 2,000 people are dying daily in the US. 2,000. How many people do you think might need treatment? It's probably tens of thousands daily.
And in his view, the companies offering up to $400 for plasma and sending emails to donors aren't helping.
We don't want people being paid who might otherwise be donors to hospitals, to blood banks, to the Red Cross, and so forth.
When you're deciding where to donate, Paneth, Brzezinski, and other experts recommend prioritizing donations to local blood banks to meet immediate needs.
But in the near-term crisis under COVID-19, those donations that go to the Red Cross and to local academic health centers, or even like a small community hospital that's holding a local blood drive, those donations are going to be far more likely to turning into like near-term addressing, preserving life in the context of the pandemic than would a paid donation at a plasma center.
That's it for us, gang. If you're into baseball, hopefully your team wins. If not, here's to doing something equally as satisfying this weekend. We'll be back Monday with more In the Loop, same time, same place. But don't go anywhere just yet. More top stories from Newsy are headed your way right now.